Hello and welcome to the 2021 Urban Tree Festival. My name's Greg Packman. I'm one of the organisers of the steering group of the Urban Tree Festival, and I'll be the overall host this evening, but you won't see me until the end again after this. The Urban Tree Festival is a celebration of all things urban trees, their benefits and their beauty, their majesty and their magic. The festival seeks to connect tree lovers and tree newcomers alike and of all kinds to their local urban trees, connecting people to each other and to share tree knowledge far and wide. The festival runs until Sunday the 23rd with a wide range of fantastic and inspiring events, which you can find on our website and event listing, which I'll be putting into the chat very soon. The festival is run and organised by volunteers, and although we're very kindly supported by organisations such as the Conservation Volunteers, Woodland Trust, Greater London Authority and Trees for Cities, we are very reliant upon donations. So to anybody who has donated, a huge thank you. It helps us very much in running the festival. If anybody would like to, then that's another link that I'll put in the chat. So the Conservation Volunteers who are bringing us tonight's event. The Conservation Volunteers brings people together to create, improve and care for green spaces, from local parks and community gardens to local nature reserves and SSIs. From school grounds and hospital grounds to waterways, wetlands and woodlands, they connect people to the green spaces that form a vital part of any healthy and happy community. So I'm going to introduce our two speakers tonight. First up is Douglas Palarm, Head of Corporate Partnerships for the Conservation Volunteers, and Peter Hutchings, Partnerships. So I'll hand over to Pete and Douglas, who will give tonight's presentation.
Thanks, Greg. And Pete, I'll hand over to you to start.
There we go. I hope everyone can see that. Thank you, Greg, for that introduction. And it's great to be here and speak to you about tree planting and the Conservation Volunteers. I think Greg put that really well as an introduction to ourselves. We are a national volunteering charity focused on connecting people and green spaces to create healthier, happier communities. We'll just add that some of these photos on the slides were taken pre-COVID. So this is from our 60th anniversary event in 2019 during National Tree Week. I think there's a lovely synergy between what the Urban Tree Festival does around connecting people and trees and what we do at the Conservation Volunteers. It is a main focus of our work to connect people and green spaces, not just tree related. I won't be reading off these statistics, but as you can see, that just gives you a bit of an idea of the scope of our work across the UK and then the numbers of people that we work with every year. While the numbers are slightly different for 2020, what's not included here is what we've done tree related and in particular tree planting. So over the last few years, we've planted 1.5 million trees. And despite COVID, managed to distribute and plant 370,000 trees in the past season, all across the UK. So the Conservation Volunteers have 4 sort of strategic goals that underpin our work. First of all, health and well-being. You may recognise Green Gym logo in the top corner or on the volunteers t-shirts there. It's one of our flagship programmes about getting people outdoors and active in groups and connecting with nature for the benefit of their physical and mental health well-being. And we typically would work with other charities like Mind or GPs or health referral partners who are encouraging volunteers to participate in our activities to benefit them. We often say that the green outcomes, you can see the guys here have grown some lovely vegetables, are incidental, and actually the main focus is on the improvement to those individuals who've participated in our activities. Another key strand focus for us is around the community and helping groups to become stronger and enable them to take an active role in creating and looking after outdoor spaces that are unique to them and address the issues that they're facing locally. A lovely picture again here from the team in Reading, working with a very active community group there to improve their local park in Reading. So another big part of what we do at the Conservation Volunteers is improving participants' learning and skills opportunities. So through participating in our activities, we're encouraging people to learn more about the practical element of what we do in terms of conservation management, tree planting, and we're also working with a lot of community groups across the UK, not just the ones that we actively work with and the stakeholders and TRAs that we are working with ourselves, but also over 1,500 groups who are part of our TCV community network, who access training, guides, discounted insurance, discounted access to some of our suppliers. You might also recognise in the photo there the gentleman in the middle who joined us 5 years ago now to mark his 90th birthday. It was just, I think, last week, his 95th, coming to join us at a park in Camden to plant a elm tree. And it was a fantastic day for some of our volunteers to get a great opportunity to meet Sir David there. All of our strategic goals are obviously focused around the environment. And as Greg was saying in an introduction, we work in such a wide and diverse range of habitats and wetlands, woodlands, hedgerows, grasslands, meadows, you name it, food growing, community green spaces. We do that. And it's all focused on around the environment and improving biodiversity in those spaces. And as I've touched on, upskilling those volunteers and participants who join us in that work. And tree planting is just a very small part of what the conservation volunteers do. Our day in, day out work is within those spaces, and the number one most important thing for us is managing what we already have or improving what we already have. So it's the Urban Tree Festival. We're going to be talking about the Miyawaki tree planting method today predominantly. I just wanted to sort of touch on some of the issues that we're facing in our urban ecosystems that Miyawaki can offer a potential opportunity to mitigate against them. So obviously in our built environment in which we live in an urban city where we have a lot of surface ceiling, very useful to have these roads and pathways for us to get around, but is obviously contributing towards reduced permeability and erosion and creating microclimates in our city by retaining heat, which isn't great for trees. We're also compacting the soil a lot in our built environment, and our trees are becoming containerized. So our street trees are really struggling because they've got less space to grow and establish, and it makes them less able and less resilient to wind and stuff like that, because they're not able to set down those roots, as I'm sure we're all aware. And we have incredibly tidy green spaces and grounds maintenance contracts that keep our green spaces nice and tidy and removing a lot of green waste, leaf litter that is important for soil health and our trees' health. That's what they are reliant on. And of course, new developments, we're seeing increasing pressure on green spaces to create housing and new urban environments for people. But quite often in those developments, less so nowadays, but in the past, perhaps having issues like a lot of underground services, poor soil and topsoil, and poor choices of biodiverse plants, and a favouring of more horticultural varieties that aren't great for our natural wildlife and biodiversity. We're seeing improvements in that. Obviously, we're having huge impacts on our environment through pollution, litter, and fertilizers that we're using. And we're also doing a lot of work to divert water and watercourses like rivers and canals, and seeing less soft natural banks, which are important habitats and obviously help to cool air in an urban environment. So with the green recovery post-COVID, there is a lot of economic benefits to tree planting and improvement of biodiversity, and it has a huge benefit on our own personal health in terms of air quality and us enjoying our urban built environment. So looking at those increased requirements for the space that we have in urban environments and how we're going to plant more trees, the Miyawaki method is just one method that we are using at the Conservation Volunteers to help combat those issues. I'm going to hand over to Dougie now to explain a little bit more about the Miyawaki method.
Thanks very much, Pete, and good evening, everybody. So I guess first it might just be good to set some context as to why Miyawaki with the Conservation Volunteers. And I manage our corporate partnerships along with Pete. And we work with a number of corporate partners, and we plant probably about 500,000 trees a year. So that's a mix of TCV direct planting trees and also working with our corporate partners. Pete, did you want to just go back to the last slide? And working with our corporate partners as well. And it's a real challenge for TCV. We predominantly plant in towns and cities. And the big challenge for us is where to actually plant trees and green our towns and cities. And we started looking about 1.5 years ago. We discovered came across the Miyawaki method online. And much of the information and the data at that time was aligned to projects in Asia. And whilst it seemed really impressive in terms of the claims and what the Miyawaki method could deliver, I guess there was an element of skepticism from certainly from myself and some of my colleagues around it wasn't very comparable in terms of tree species and climate. And then we came across a charity in the Netherlands, which some people on here may have heard of, IVN. And we reached out to them, and that was really useful. They've been going 6 years now in the Netherlands, developing the tiny forest, utilizing the Miyawaki method. They'd already started to do research working with a university over there, and they were able to share some really interesting evidence. So that gave us some confidence to look at this method, and as an approach that as a charity, we'd look as an environmental charity, as a method we were really keen to trial and just see some of those results for ourselves. So for us, Miyawaki potentially could help us with that challenge of increasing the tree cover in the towns and cities, which is a challenge for us. So next slide, please, Pete. So what is the Miyawaki method? Well, it could be a tiny forest, a mini urban forest, a pocket forest. I think the latest one I've heard is wee forests, which are coming to Scotland. So it's all of these, that name encapsulates all of it. But it's actually about the planting method used, Miyawaki, not the name of what you call the forest itself. It's actually about the method of planting. And the Miyawaki method has 7 key stages. The technique itself comes from Professor Miyawaki, who's been pioneering this planting method in Japan for over 60 years ago. And the method itself is relatively new to the UK and to Europe. I think we've seen a huge amount of, certainly I've noticed a huge amount of interest in this method over the past 7-8 months versus I think if we looked at this around 2019. And I think the single biggest question that gets asked back to me and Pete and to others within TCV is this better than the traditional UK tree planting method of we would adopt perhaps sort of 1 meter apart? And I think we would say that this isn't about better. I think that's the wrong way to approach the Miyawaki method. I think it's an alternative method to planting, but I don't think it's about better. It's about understanding it more and using it in the right space. But we would very much see this as an alternative method, not something that's necessarily better. So Pete. So the 7 key stages of Miyawaki. So I'll not go into the devil of the detail of the bullets, but it would be that initial field survey. Then there's a soil test. the pre and post planting soil preparation, and key to the Miyawaki, and I guess what sets it apart is around how the soil is prepared and the ground itself. And then creating the tree planting plan aligned to the space and what those mix of trees would be across the canopy, the tree, the subtree, and the shrub layer. And Pete will come on to that a little bit later. And the planting of the trees is, I guess, a little bit different in terms of the number of people we would engage in the Miyawaki method versus traditional. We'd certainly involve less people because you don't want them walking across the surface that you've prepared. And then mulching after that, and then finally the fencing around the perimeter to protect the area. So those are the key 7 stages that predominantly would need to be adopted by anybody using the Miyawaki method. And Pete, over to you.
Cool. So let's dive into having a look in more detail at those 7 key stages to creating a Miyawaki forest or mini forest. As with all tree planting programs, we want to make sure you're selecting the right tree for the right location. And there's a little bit more work done in field surveying in planning a Miyawaki method than quite often is used in traditional tree planting methods. So it's about identifying existing native tree species that you would find within a 2-kilometer radius of your planting location. So you're basically fast tracking rewilding and thinking about what trees would naturally grow there if you were to let nature take its course. So yeah, you're looking around the area and noting those native trees and plants that are found in the area, looking at those that grow well together or creating little biodiversity pockets, and choosing trees that are native because they are better able to deal with those local conditions in that area, and they are also best placed to help in that environment tackle climate change. And we at TCV only use UK seed, UK grown trees, and with the Miyawaki method, that's imperative that you do so using native tree species because that encourages the native biodiversity that you'd find in your tree planting location. So soil testing is another important part of the Miyawaki method. There's a lot of soil preparation I'll come on to in a second that's involved. So it's important before you do anything to survey for underground services. In some cases, you are going to be digging up to 1 meter into the soil. So avoiding electricity and water pipes is key. And the soil is basically, you're creating the best complex ecosystem to support those trees that you're putting in, and it's the absolute foundation of what's going to support and feed those trees and make them establish hopefully quicker than a traditional planting method. So you're looking for what's there present. You're also having a look at what the water table is like. You can do some test pits to work out the density of the soil and have a look at the layers and nutrients that the soil contains, and have a look at what the topsoil looks like and how rich that is with organic material that's already in place. And yeah, as I say, in an urban environment, as I touched on earlier, you might be combating a lot of compaction, especially if you're turning over amenity grassland that's been used for sports, for example, or many picnics and dog walks. So soil preparation, you're creating that optimum condition and a paradise for those trees to establish. You want to create a loose, airy soil up to 1 meter deep, and dependent on what you've got in the planting location already, you might want to be choosing some soil supplements that you might to use to increase the nutrients within the soil layers. So sometimes you can use well-rotted leaf manure, or you can use, quite often straw is used, of course, or organic and preferably locally sourced. As you would have saw from a previous slide, the project that we did at this past tree planting season, it does require the use of large machinery. Even ourselves at the conservation volunteers, with all our volunteer power, might think, oh, we could have volunteers dig a metre down. It's hard work, and it does require large machinery. So it's a key thing to also highlight how important community engagement is when you're planning a Miyawaki forest, because a big digger turning up in your local green space is obviously going to create quite the kerfuffle. So community engagement is a key. So yeah, you're excavating down the length and width of your forest to about 1 metre deep, taking all of that current soil out, and then basically backfilling half of that, mixing in your soil improvers, backfilling the other half, and again repeating to create a well-mixed, well-structured, loose, airy soil up to 1 metre deep. So, creating your planting plan. You need to, as a result of the surveying work that you've done, pick the best trees to create a forest that's suited for the area. So if you've got a particularly dry area, you might want to be thinking about your apex top canopy layer species being oak or beech, or if you've got more wet planting location, you might want to think about those species like willow and ash and alder that prefer an environment like that. You really want to create a tree list looking at all the different layers that you would find in a native forest, dedicating around 15 to 20% of your top layer canopy species to those longer lasting trees like oak. Then when you're thinking about selecting your trees, as I say, we at TCV use UK seed, UK grown. Provenance is incredibly important, where that seed is sourced and that you're picking the right trees for the right location. It doesn't matter if you use bare root or cell grown trees at all. The project that we did last season, we did use cell grown, but bare root works just as well. You're planting more densely than traditional tree planting methods, so you're going to need 3 trees per square metre. And we do it's quite often spoken about when you're talking about a mini forest in terms of it being around the size of a tennis court size. It doesn't have to be square and can fit in around your urban setting and what's already in there, and can be really creative in the space and the design requirements, and include things like benches and signage and fit in around the environment that you have. And so yeah, you can choose any shape you like. Planting your trees, you want to make sure that you're getting a good mix and a distribution of those trees across the planting space. So you can either do this pre-planting, mix them up, or make sure that you're giving those planting volunteers or staff a good mix. So you're not planting in rows, you're trying to replicate what would happen in nature and have a random selection of trees. So mix them all up throughout the planting area. And yeah, try to avoid planting trees of the same species close to each other, so you're getting a good mix of top canopy layer all the way down to the shrub layer in the same area. And yeah, you're planting only 30 centimeters apart, which is quite close for tree planting. But the key thing is not to firm. You've done all that work to create this loose, airy soil, and we want to be as light-footed as possible putting the trees in. But it is the best opportunity to engage local people in with the project is having people plant the trees and be involved in that element of the day, whether that's local residents, school groups, community groups that you're working with, stakeholders. That's their opportunity to get involved. Mulching is another important thing. That soil and that ecosystem that you've created needs protection from the sun. That delicate balance of microbes that you're trying to develop need protection. We also want to help with water retention, as we all know with any tree planting project. So again, you can use leaf mold, or in this occasion we've used straw. You might want to replenish that in the first few years while that top canopy layer knits together, to make sure that you're retaining moisture and keeping your nutrients in and protecting the soil. And this can actually be much more time consuming than the planting and soil preparation part of the Miyawaki planting, because you've got to delicately go in amongst and around the trees and bring that material in. So it's actually can take a lot longer than the tree planting itself. And then finally, with planting a Miyawaki forest, you want to fence that or secure it from what I like to term as the tree's biggest enemies, and unfortunately that's us humans. So we want to eliminate people creating desire lines through your planting area, keep off, unfortunately, other contractors on mowers or with their strimmers, and hopefully negate against any potential vandalism. And yeah, obviously in an urban environment, we might not have so much deer or rabbit, but in a more rural setting, you might want to make sure that that fencing does keep out, I suppose, tree predators, for want of a better term. Cool, I'll hand back over to Dougie to talk a little bit more about why we use this method.
Thanks, Pete. So you can plant up to 3 times the volume of trees in the same area versus traditional planting. So I think that's something I touched on earlier about, certainly for TCV, allowing us to introduce more trees into a smaller space, certainly in towns and cities where we work. And as Pete touched on, about 600 trees in a sort of tennis court size area, which is about 260 square meters, but it's perhaps easier to visualize thinking of that tennis court size. But again, as Pete touched upon, it doesn't necessarily have to be tennis court shape. It lends itself to planting in towns and cities where space is a premium, or where you want to have a mixed use of a space. It increases and supports a greater level of biodiversity. And the project that I'll come on to, or we'll talk a little bit as we go through this, and that we delivered at Parslows Park in London last year. It's incredible now to look at the number of trees we've introduced to that space, 32,000 trees, and what that'll deliver for the biodiversity in that park versus the simply the grassed area that was there before. It's incredibly good for engaging people. So whether it's adults or children in citizen science, certainly for us, a big part of what we're looking to do with the Miyawaki method over the next 3 years is how we learn more about, I guess, this technique versus traditional, and those benefits. So around the growth rates, attrition, the difference in biodiversity, the quality of the soil. So we're already developing our citizen science project for the Miyawaki projects that we're creating now. It could potentially support a network of green corridors across our towns and cities. I think that's a big challenge, and something that we're looking at is how do you create these green corridors in a hardscape town. And it can be maintenance free from year 3. That's something that's very much reported about this method. So come year 3, it's established, you have that density of the plant, and the fencing is removed, and to a great extent it's self-sustaining. I think that's something, again, for us to learn and find out as we work through this method and as it matures, as the projects mature. So Pete, next slide, please. So this is, I guess, a really good question. So isn't this really just a gimmick with little to substantiate the Miyawaki claims? And it's definitely a challenge that we've found that has come back repeatedly as we've chatted to different individuals and different stakeholders around the Miyawaki. So I guess we're on a learning curve as much as anybody else. We definitely couldn't say absolutely what is purported to be delivered by Miyawaki. So the rapid growth, the increased absorption of CO2, the increased biodiversity. That's for us to learn and still to understand in the UK. But I guess what we've been guided by is the research that's been done in the Netherlands. And I would urge anybody sort of that's really interested in this on this event to visit IVN and just Google those guys and look at some of the data, some of the research. They have some new research, which is actually due out in the next month. And they have a really nice 2-year time-lapse video of a project that they created. So as I would say, look at the information that's already there. And certainly their reports, I'll not go through the bullets, but this is the benefit and this is the results that they've had. And they've benchmarked their project in the Netherlands. It was a new Miyawaki forest they created versus a traditional plant forest that had been created 10 years ago. So they've been benchmarking it against that, and it's really interesting just to read what they've found. But for us, oops, sorry guys, my screen's just gone. But for us, we're at the very early stages of this, and we're very open to what might come in terms of the results. Pete, next slide, please. So the conservation volunteers, a mini urban forest. So last year was our first Miyawaki project in November in partnership with Parslows Park in Dagenham with the council. To date, it's the single largest Miyawaki project in Europe. We actually planted 28,000 trees as part of the forest. And that design you could see is that's how the forest will look when it matures. So it's a nice leaf design across a 1 hectare site that people can obviously sort of looks really nice. We feel, and that design was put forward by one of the partners that worked on this project, Sugi. There will be 32,000 trees planted in total. I'll come on to, there's a little bit of a difference, and 24 different species used across the 4 stages. So we had 4 different areas that made up the whole project. And next slide, please, Pete. And I guess the project for us, what really stood out was it was a great opportunity to work collaboratively. So obviously with Dagenham Park and Council, who it was their park, and they had this vision of creating this large scale project with the partners from Sugi that supported in the design and the planting technique, Thames Chase Community Forest, who supported with the planting, and our partner NatWest Group, who supplied the trees. And I would urge anybody, the link won't quite work here, but to go on and just have a look at the project and the scale of it, because I guess our project is a little bit of a contradiction to Miyawaki in general, and people talk about a mini forest or a tiny forest, and ours was 28,000 trees. And I guess what it's shown is you don't have to just use Miyawaki for a small scale project. You can actually build that up, and the volume of trees we've got into this relatively small area, you know, should look incredible in 1 or 2 years time. And Pete, next slide, please. And I guess, as I've touched on already, you know, we're absolutely not claiming that we know or we have absolute faith in the Miyawaki method, but we're really receptive to learning and understanding. So for us, this is just the beginning. We had more Miyawaki projects that would have been planted in the tree season that has just ended. We didn't unfortunately get the chance to do that because of COVID and projects being cancelled. So we've got a number of Miyawaki projects for the season ahead. And what's really interesting and exciting, I guess, for TCV is there'll be some of those smaller Miyawaki projects that we're just creating for everything we've spoken about around biodiversity, green in our towns and cities. But we're also going to do some projects where we're planting Miyawaki to see how it supports flood mitigation. We'll also be planting some projects to see how that works in terms of absorbing sound and sound barriers. So back to the Parslows Park project, adjacent to where we've created this, the Miyawaki space, we will also be planting 3,000 trees using the traditional method this year. And then over the next 3 years, we'll be recording and benchmarking against the two planting techniques. And some of those top line things we will look at will be growth rates, the soil quality, the biodiversity, the attrition, and we're working with multiple partners and stakeholders to understand not only the Miyawaki projects that we're working on, but also that other charities are creating. So we start to get this sharing of data and information, and just to understand how effective Miyawaki is. So I think for us as TCV, it's very much to wait and see, and we'll be informed, I guess, by the projects we're delivering over the next 3 years in terms of, does Miyawaki deliver everything we hope, everything we, I guess, have been led to believe by some of the research, certainly from IVN and then farther afield. So yes, it's the early stages, but we'll definitely be doing that academic research and that rigor to understand more. And Pete? And that's it. Thank you for your time. I think there might be an opportunity for some questions. And if anybody's got any questions that they're just sort of flagging on the question and answer, Pete and I will definitely respond to those as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating stuff. Yeah, I've heard an awful lot about Miyawaki over the past year in the news, but I've had very, very little chance to actually go into any depth to find out about stuff. So I was very grateful to hear that. It's really, really fascinating, and look forward to seeing how it goes. Right, we had some questions coming in, so I'll start with Caroline Mayer. It's 2 questions I'm going to put in one. Does your tree survey method consider the climate crisis? Maybe native trees are not going to cope with upcoming climate projections, pests. Now the second part is, does your preparation mean you can or cannot cope with sites that are contaminated?
Pete, did you want to? I'm quite happy.
Go for it.
So the first part, in terms of those native species, and would they be suitable? I think it's really interesting question, certainly for some of the projects that we have in the south of England. And I know that it's a topic, as we have a warmer climate in the UK, that some of our native species just may not survive or may not be suitable. I would say for us, in truth, at this stage, and where we are with Miyawaki, I would imagine we would only be looking at using native UK species. It might be, in terms of the academic research and as it evolves in the different Miyawaki projects that we work on over the next 3 years, that may be something we introduce specifically just to understand, introducing those native species, and non-native species, and how do they thrive in terms of the Miyawaki method. So that's what I would say for us for now. The projects that we are planning in, certainly for next season, and I would imagine the one after, it would be very much around those native plants, native species. And then with regards to the land that could be contaminated, and would the Miyawaki method be suitable to use that within that space? Again, it's not something that we've thought about. I think probably quite the opposite, as we're looking to use this method at the moment. And Pete's point before around the quality of the soil and that soil sampling, I guess we'd probably be looking this season and next season to the easy option, or the safest option in terms of the trees surviving. I think what we found, or what we planned for the Parslows Park project, which I think could be more of a challenge for people, not necessarily around contamination, is just when you excavate the area, just the quality of the soil. So if there's a huge amount of rubble in there, if there's been foundation works, because that potentially could impact the the investment in the project, because if you have to effectively take away a lot of that subsoil and then swap it in for something else. And at the Parslow's project, we thought there were going to be a number of foundations there historically from buildings that might have existed in the war. There wasn't, so that was a real bonus. So yeah, I hope I've answered that.
Okay, great. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Pete, or shall I move to the next?
Let's move on. I think that was quite comprehensive.
Okay, great. So we've got people putting questions in both the chat and the Q&A. If I can ask everyone puts all questions into the Q&A panel, it saves me scrolling through 2 screens so I don't miss them. So we've had a couple of questions on very similar themes, and that's basically the difference between Miyawaki and conventional forestry planting. It's basically along the lines of what happens as the trees get older when they're densely planted. Are they more likely to blow over in the wind and fall over? I suppose just the theory behind that dense planting compared to traditional planting methods.
I'm happy to take that one.
Yeah.
So as I said earlier, you are fast tracking what would happen in terms of rewilding and establishing what would natively grow there. Obviously, with that surveying element, you are trying to pick those trees that are going to do best in that situation. But obviously, natural selection is going to determine what trees favour that area and what establishes long term. Obviously, as the trees mature, it should you should basically be, as I say, fast tracking creating an ancient forest, and those longer living species will do their thing, and those shorter lived species will set seed and replenish as spaces open up in there and fall and compost back into the soil. Oh, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Just to reiterate, it's about trying to fast track and to create what would be a native forest and what it would naturally do and those natural cycles as quickly as possible.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
And Greg, was part of that question about, was about the trees potentially falling over? Was that? Did I pick that
well,
up?
there have been quite a few comments relating to the same theme. I'll try and find. Here we go. So this one of the questions was from Sophia Mears, comparing the fast-growing trees to becoming sort of tall, skinny teenagers compared to sort of stocky, trunked adults. In terms of the longer-term outcome, and when the wind blows hard, do we know how sturdy they are? I suppose it really relates to longevity of the trees and tree safety as well.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And if, I guess part of the challenge is we could point to evidence. So you could point to Japan, and they've had big success there with the Miyawaki method being used for flood mitigation. And one of the theories is the density of the roots makes them it incredibly stable. So I guess contrary to that, it's actually quite stable, the sort of the method in this block of trees. And we will be planting trees next season. We're just planning out a project that is to support a flood mitigation plan and just to see how it works. So that sort of tall, skinny, and the potential for those to be blown over and to be unstable. I guess the evidence doesn't point to that we have outside of the UK, but I couldn't say any different other than it'll depend on the research and what we find over the course of the projects that we're working on.
Okay, great, thanks. Again, I'm going to combine 2 questions here because they're somewhat similar. First is from Ursula. For how long do you fence off a forest like this? And then the second part from Alan. I suppose these forests aren't suitable for public access / amenity. Are paths routed through? When they get to maturity, can they be opened up more for public use?
Yeah. I'm happy, Pete. Are you? I don't mind.
Oh, well, we could do a bit of it. I mean, so looking at the project we did in Parswood Park, we didn't actually fence that project off. It's obviously quite a large scale planting, and we have been speaking to other partners around highlighting issues around antisocial behaviour and security because of the dense planting, also getting in there to deal with issues like litter. So it really is as per the landowner and your desired outcome for the forest in the long term, how long you want to fence that. So when you're thinking about making sure those trees get the best start in life, is trying to secure them for the first 3 years while that canopy layer knits together and creates a dense planting space that people are less likely to go into, and you're going to get less issues of litter blowing in there. So I would say traditionally you'd probably look to fence it off for the first 3 years while it establishes, and then it's up to the landowner whether they take that fencing down and it's dense enough that it's going to discourage people from creating desire lines or wanting to go in there. Then in terms of using it in public spaces, it's ideal for urban planting spaces because you're planting so densely, and you are trying to discourage people from venturing in there. But you can, as you can see from the aerial shot of what the project will look at Parswood Park, incorporate pathways and into the design and make sure that it is accessible. But obviously, if you're planting a mini forest, putting a pathway in is going to limit the amount of trees that you can put in. So we are talking about very small spaces. It's hope you're not taking away from or trying not to impact too much on what public amenity space there is, and that's why it's quite a good use for urban environments when there's a lot of pressure on our green spaces in trying to maintain space for people, space for wildflower meadows, and space for other biodiversity improvements. So it's I think ideal for public spaces.
And I think just to pick up on that as well, Pete, I would reiterate that I think there is a huge opportunity here to use the Miyawaki to get that really dense planting in a small area. And if we look at Parslows Park, you could have just done one single block of planting, and I think that would have been really to the detriment of the space and the functionality and the interaction of the space. So what's being created, these 4 leaf motifs and the ability for the public to engage and walk through and be part of it. And it was really interesting on the day that we were there planting, just how many of the public, one, came up just to chat about what we were doing, but also the people that were there that were dog walkers, for example. Initially, they were thinking actually this space was going to be created and it was going to encroach on their ability to walk the dogs and engage with this green field that was there previously. But actually, without exception, everybody was really receptive to it because it did have this ability to walk through and flow through it. So I think if you were creating one traditional sort of 200 tennis court size, I think as Pete says, there's a limit to how much you would want to really cut that down. But if you had a space and you could put in 2 or 3 of those sizes, then I think you're really adding value there.
Okay, great, thank you. I saw one comment in the chat asking about recording. This is being recorded. It will be uploaded to the Urban Tree Festival YouTube page in time, sometime soon. So, question from Rachel. This was posted quite early. Why not create a mound like Miyawaki does? As Miyawaki suggests a mound to aid drainage, or is this because urban locations and a mound isn't possible? So I think this is more to do with the more technical aspect of designing and then planting the Miyawaki forest.
Unless Pete's got an answer, I would say I would need to come back on that one because I just wouldn't want to give something that wasn't factually correct.
Yeah, likewise, definitely what we've been doing with our project and what we've the guidance that we've been working with and following what IVN have been doing, we have gone at soil level planting, as you would with traditional mulching method.
And I think one of the challenges we faced this season was we had another 5 Miyawaki projects planned in. Nothing like the scale of the Parslows Park one, more of your traditional size, I guess. And we had those across the UK in very different locations. And one of the things we wanted to understand, because this is a new method to us, was a bit like the question earlier. So some of the challenges around the quality of the soil that we planted on, some of the different spaces we were planting in, and just unfortunately with COVID, we just didn't get the opportunity. So had we have done, we'd have probably had some more real-time true examples and some feedback of what we'd have experienced.
Okay, great, thank you. From Kim Thornton, approximately how many volunteers were involved in the project at planting stage?
Yeah, it wasn't that many. So it was really interesting. So initially we were going to plant the project over, I'll be honest with everybody, over a 2-week period with about 600 volunteers in staggered stages. And that was a mix of people direct planting and people sort of feeding the supply of trees, and then an element of mulching. What we ended up having to do because of COVID, it was a mix of volunteers, and we brought in some contract partners to support. And I think we had probably about 15 volunteers, so local volunteers, and we had about 5 to 6 contractors. And the whole project was planted in about 7 days. But to Pete's point, the mulching, I think, took about 10 to 14 days by the local volunteers. So about 18 volunteers. But if we were doing that project outside of COVID on that scale, we'd have been looking at about 600 volunteers. Not every day, that have been staggered across the event.
Okay, great. Right, so there's 2 questions here, which I'm kind of thinking, should I combine? Because there's similar-ish. But I'll start with Andrew's, which is, what is the science behind incorporating organic matter at depths of up to 1 metre? Typically, organic matter would not be present below 300 mil or 400 mil in depth. And then I kind of half wanted to combine that with Sam's, because it's to do with the greater level of biodiversity and sort of the theory behind that. I suppose, yeah, answering separately, but yeah.
So the first one, I'm going to defer to Pete, and if he hasn't got an answer, I would say would come back. I would definitely have an answer on the second one.
Yeah, so in terms of creating that depth of organic material, and it kind of supports a little bit of what we were talking about those trees establishing, is about getting those roots down deeply and encouraging them, because obviously we're planting so densely. They're going to, as somebody rightly pointed out, they're going to grow up tall and skinny. What we need to do is encourage the root depth. That's the theory behind it. But definitely, it's one that I will have a look at in more in depth and come back to you on that one, Andrew.
Oh, sorry. Okay, and then the second part was to do with the theory of a greater level of biodiversity than the traditionally planted woodlands.
So the greater level of biodiversity, that's been based, and we've went with that on the Netherlands, and the information that they found there benchmarked against the 2. In terms of the why, I wouldn't have that information. I could certainly again come back with that, but unless for you, Pete.
No, absolutely fine with that.
Okay, great. I think this could be a bit of a quick one. From Sam White, is 3 plants per square metre the same as 30 centimetre spacings?
Well, I know we planted at Parslow's 50 centimetre spacing, so I think there's a little bit of flex on that. But Pete, I know it's 50 centimetres at Parslow's.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a there is flexibility. It's not obviously the 7 stages to the method are key, but it's as per your requirements for the space. So yeah, 30, 50 centimeters, absolutely fine. But yeah, we're typically looking for within a 2 meter square, you're looking for around 7 trees. That's what we were doing at Parslow. So yeah, we're creating something natural. We don't want rows and lines and measuring tapes.
Very much. There's nothing natural about trees planted in straight lines. So I'll go to a question from Conchita, which I think is an incredibly relevant question, and that is, how receptive to this concept are London councils so far, including Haringey? So I know that Conchita's a Haringey resident, and of course you've got the Conservation Volunteers Haringey locally as well.
Yeah, it's a very active borough for us. I'm sure Dougie's having conversations UK-wide,
Yeah.
and we are having multiple conversations with London boroughs as well. And I think overall, we are speaking to those boroughs who are very, very receptive. I've not personally come across any London boroughs that are too sceptical, and there's a lot of interest in the planting method, and there's a lot of interest in terms of, especially as a lot of our local councils are announcing climate emergencies, around how they're going to mitigate against that, and how they can fit more trees into an urban space. And this is one method that they're very keen to work with us and other partners on. So yeah, very, very briefly, very receptive.
And I would just echo Pete's comments. We are talking to local authorities right across the UK, but this I need to sort of emphasize, this still forms a very, very small part, I think, of anybody's, whether it's local authorities, partners, stakeholders we work with, even as we do tree planting as TCV. The Miyawaki method would be a very small part of the overall number of trees we plant as a method. It's just a part of.
Yeah, and just on Haringey specifically, it is very much just a part of. There is a lot of activity for TCV in Haringey, not just tree planting, but I know that there is a lot of tree planting coming up. I'm not aware of a Miyawaki being part of that, but it could be.
Okay, great. Also, I need to say a big thanks to TCV Haringey, because they did some fantastic soil decompaction work for me around some old oak trees up at Alexandra Park, which I was immensely grateful for. We had a question come in from Nicola Dempsey, which actually was right on time because it was tied in with the next question I was going to ask from D. Finch. The Nicola's is fascinating talk, thanks. Do your conversations with borough councils cover the cost? Is it possible to give an estimate of how much a scheme would cost? And then D. Finch's question was, what is the comparative cost of implementing a Miyawaki forest compared to a traditional woodland planting?
Ooh, it's all the secrets. So a Miyawaki forest, so a tennis court size, if TCV was doing that for a local authority or any partner, and they were meeting the full cost, you would probably be looking at somewhere between sort of £6,000 and £7,000. But I would caveat that with, one of the biggest challenges for us as TCV is where we can plant, is the availability of land. So if we were working with a local authority, as we did with Parslow's and with our corporate partners, then we can bring added value. So if you think of that project in Parslow's Park, the cost of those trees was provided by our corporate partner, and because of our engagement. So I think there will always be the opportunity on the project that it isn't necessarily that cost if we can engage a corporate partner. And if I'm thinking of this flood mitigation project, I can't sort of share anything about it, but again, that one is very much something that will be supported by one of our corporate partners, which will then help in terms of offset the cost. So if you think of those 600 trees that it requires for the Miyawaki, and we say that's sort of £6,000 to £7,000. If you are looking to do a traditional tree plant with TCV and come out with your partners and do it, you would probably be looking at somewhere around £2,500. So the Miyawaki method is a higher cost, and that essentially is that ground prep. That's where the cost comes in. And I think then the other thing that the cost around the Miyawaki would be dependent upon if a partner really wanted, whether it was a local authority or another, if they wanted to engage that citizen science element of it. So whether that was with volunteers, whether it was with a school, but the project itself, with TCV, it would be sort of £6,000 to £7,000.
Okay, thank you. So it's 6:02. What I'll do is I'll very, very quickly ask one final question. So Leslie said what their land size is required, but from anonymous attendee, what are the other results from other Miyawaki projects in terms of climate emergencies at the moment? And then I think we'll have to close questions there. So we're just over 6. If we can do, sort of answer those briefly, but comprehensively as possible. Just so we can
And I probably wasn't, I'm not 100% clear on the question.
Okay, so the first one was from Leslie, which is what area of land is required, and while we're on the inside, it was tennis court size.
So what area of land, as a minimum ideal, 260 square meters, but just remember that it doesn't necessarily have to be that rectangular size. If you think of the project for us as Parslow's, that was very much shaped in a different way. So I think it would be looking at the space you have, how you want to utilize it, but as a minimum size overall, you're looking at that 260 square meters to get in 600 trees.
Okay, great. And is there anywhere online where audience members could see the ongoing results of the Miyawaki projects in other locations and countries?
Yeah, for me, I mean, if you Google Miyawaki now, a year ago there wasn't that much. Now there is, but I would really direct people to IVN in the Netherlands. Just literally put in IVN Netherlands, and they will come up, and they've got a really good video. They're adding all the time because they're 6 years ahead of us. So they've got a really nice time-lapse video, which shows one of their Miyawaki forests over a 2-year period, and just showing sort of the maturity of the trees and what they look like. They've got this new report coming out. So there's lots of stuff out there, but for me, the Netherlands was the one that we've really latched onto because it's comparable in terms of climate, species, that sort of thing.
And in sort of coming to the close, I'll include a link to some of the information from IVN and some more information, links to videos as well. And if you'd like to ask any more questions that come to you after that, I'm very happy to answer them as well. Okay,
great. And I want to say a big thank you to you both. I found that really, really fascinating. Like I said, it's something that I've wanted to learn about more. Looking at the comments in the chat, I think everyone else has found that really useful. So yeah, job well done all round. And also from an Urban Tree Festival perspective, this is something that we're hoping to come back to and explore in festivals in years to come, because it's a very interesting and exciting project to look at. This session's been recorded. You'll be able to see it go on YouTube. Please check out the Urban Tree Festival website to find more of our events. Check out Conservation Volunteers website to find out about their projects. But thank you from me, and thank you to Pete and Douglas, and have a great evening. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Much appreciated. And everybody that joined in.